Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Sunday service. My name is Thomas. I'm glad to join you here today. I'm part of the pastoral team. Really blessed by the season of Lent and everybody who's been sending reflections and praying and fasting. It's been awesome. Again, if you want to join, please sign up on LinkTree, just a season of intentionality. And we especially hope that we can see a lot of you at the prayer gathering that's happening this Friday. Just a moment for our church to come during this Lent season, preparing our hearts for Easter and just lifting up our burdens to the Lord. And so we really hope that prayer could just be an automatic reflex of the community of this church. So hope you can make time for that. And spouses, husbands, maybe let your wife go, watch the kids, let them come and have this time just to pray on a Friday. If this is your first time here, we've actually been going through a sermon series through what's known as the Book of Numbers. It's been a long journey for us. We only have a few more weeks going through this, and today we are going to be looking at one of the most interesting passages in the entire book of Numbers. And so if you have your Bibles, if you turn to Numbers chapter 22, we're going to be looking at sections from Numbers 22, we're going to be looking at chapters 23, and we're also going to look at sections from chapter 24. It's in your programs, but if you're using your Bibles, just know we'll be jumping around. And we're going to first look at Numbers chapter 22, starting in verse 1. And here at our church, we believe our God is speaking when we read the scriptures. So can we all rise together as we read through this passage in Numbers chapter 22 to 24. Starting in verse 1, this is what it reads. Then the people of Israel set out and camped in the plain of Moab, beyond the Jordan at Jericho. And Balak the son of Zippor saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was in a great dread of the people, because they were many. Moab was overcome with fear of the people of Israel. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, "This horde will now lick up all that is around us, as the ox licks up the grass in the field." So Balak the son of Zippor, who was the king of Moab at the time, sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor at Petor, which is near the river in the land of the people of Ammah, to call him, saying, "Behold, a people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the earth, and they are dwelling opposite me. Come now, curse this people for me, since they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them from the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed." Jump down to verse 16. And they came to Balaam and said to him, "Thus says Balak the son of Zippor, let nothing hinder you from coming to me, for I will surely do great honor, and whatever you say to me I will do. Come, curse this people for me." But Balaam answered and said to the servants of Balak, "Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the command of the Lord my God to do less or more. So you too, please stay here tonight, that I may know what more the Lord will say to me." And God said to Balaam at night and said to him, "If the men have come to call you, rise, go with them, but only do what I tell you." So Balaam rose in the morning and saddled his donkey and went with the princes of Moab. Let's jump over to chapter 23 to verse 1. And Balaam said to Balak, "Build for me here 7 altars, and prepare for me here 7 bulls and 7 rams." Balak did as Balaam said, and Balak and Balaam offered on each altar a bull and a ram. And Balaam said to Balak, "Stand beside your burnt offering, and I will go. Perhaps the Lord will come to meet me, and whatever he shows me, I will tell you." And he went to a bare height, and God met Balaam. And Balaam said to him, "I have arranged the 7 altars, and I have offered on each altar a bull and a ram." And the Lord put a word in Balaam's mouth and said, "Return to Balak, and thus you shall speak." And he returned to him, and behold, he and all the princes of Moab were standing beside his burnt offering. Lastly, chapter 24, verse 10. And Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he struck his hands together. And Balak said to Balaam, "I called you to curse my enemies, and behold, you have blessed them these 3 times. Therefore, now flee to your own place. I said I will certainly honor you, but the Lord has held you back from honor." And Balaam said to Balak, "Did I not tell your messengers whom you sent me, if Balak should give me his house full of silver and gold, I would not be able to go beyond the word of the Lord to do either good or bad of my own will? What the Lord speaks, that will I speak. And now, behold, I am going to my people. Come, I will let you know what this people will do to you, to your people, in the latter days." This is the reading of God's word. Let's all pray together. Father, I pray again for our church as we gather today, amidst the burdens, struggles, and stress from the past, the present, the future. And we pause right now, renew our minds, speak to our hearts, and be able to tell us a greater story than the story that we imagine we're living, a story, Lord, that you have written for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You may be seated. Back in 2020, a lot of things happened, not just COVID, but a lot of hobbies started rising. Some of you started cooking sourdough bread. Some of you started knitting. One underrated thing that started happening, which I think a lot, especially the guys, might know, is an old vintage hobby started coming back into play: Pokemon cards. Yes, the price and the value of Pokemon cards started to rise, and it's just kind of blasted everywhere. Card shows just had Pokemon cards everywhere. My kids got into Pokemon cards around that time. And because of that, I often will take the kids to these card shows. When you go to card shows, you're just pretty much looking for these hidden treasures that are lying around in different binders. I saw a TikTok, and I'm not sure if this actually is real. That might have been set up, but the TikTok story was a guy who was at a flea market looking for different Pokemon cards, and he was flipping through different binders, and all of a sudden he found this bad boy. Now, if you're like me, a commoner who's very unfamiliar with this world, you just go, oh, that's like a 90s card of a dragon. I think his name is Charizard. And that's all you think when you see it. The seller who was selling this obviously thought this was just old junk and just hoping to make a few bucks off of this. But if you're a Pokemon collector, you know, your eyes will stop. Your hands would just freeze if you saw this, because you know this is what's known as, let me get it right, the first edition holographic Charizard that is worth $300,000. And that's exactly what happened. This person snatched it, turned it in, sold it, and made a huge profit. I mean, this card, you know how rappers will wear diamond necklaces and have a giant diamond? Logan Paul wears a necklace with the Charizard card to kind of show this thing is what makes him rich. That's what this card is. And the reason why I bring this up is because, again, we're all looking at the same thing, and yet not everyone's seeing the same value. We see it as just a 90s card. The seller saw it as junk. But the person with eyes to see, they see, oh, this is treasure, and you don't even know it. And I bring this up because the story of Numbers, I think, actually relates to this. We've talked about this story, and I'm going to show this chart all the time, this idea that you have this nation, this people called Israel, who God rescued out of Egypt in the story of Exodus. And they've been at Mount Sinai all of the second half of Exodus and the beginning of Numbers. They've been journeying in the wilderness, and we've been going through that for the past few weeks, what that journey looked like. And then now, finally, they are at what's called the plains of Moab. This is right at the border of the promised land in Canaan. Now, the problem is that this journey for Israel, if you've been journeying with us in the book of Numbers, you'll know that it has not been easy. From going to Sinai all the way to Moab, a lot has happened in the wilderness. And we talked about this the past few weeks. In the wilderness, what ended up happening is the Israelites, they've been wandering for 38 years in the desert, camping and traveling. And in the midst of all that, there's been a lot of grumbling and complaining amongst the Israelite people. And because of that, there's been a lot of battles and even judgment from God in the wilderness according to Numbers. And we even heard from last week, and the entire first generation, they all died. Now, if you were at the plains of Moab and you were an Israelite, how would you feel about your situation? How would you feel about where you're at? I know if I was an Israelite, I would feel, life kind of sucks. We have been traveling for 38 years, and we're still in the wilderness. Aaron died. Miriam died. Moses is going to die. My parents are dead. Everybody's dead. And now we're at this border of the promised land, and even the future doesn't look great because there's what's called what we read a few weeks ago, there's giants in the land. We have to battle them, this impossible battle. If you're an Israelite, you might look at your life and think, life sucks. And we may look at this situation and be like, yeah, your life sucks. This doesn't look like an ideal situation. And it's kind of sad. Israel, again, they grew up not in prosperity, but they've been slaves for 400 years. And even though they were rescued, they're living in tents, in the wilderness. As an Orange County person, I just see that going, man, even that alone would be rough. But all this stuff is happening to them, and their future looks uncertain. It doesn't look good for Israel at this point of the story. And I think this is significant because I think a lot of us, we could feel the same way when we look at our situation. Where we think, life, when I'm not distracted by Netflix and social media, I'm just all alone thinking about it, life feels like it could suck. You might look at your past and you think, I got dealt a bad hand. My parents, they weren't the ideal parents. The city I lived in, the way I grew up and was raised. Yeah, it was really tough for me in the past. Some of you might look at the present and you think, I am 30, I am 40, I'm in my 20s, whatever age you are, and you are not where you thought you'd be. You're like, ooh, like I had goals and I'm pretty behind. Or some of you, you look at your future and you think, wow, I have a lot more questions than I do answers about what's going to happen soon. And the result of that is there's a lot of anxiety that I think that happens with us, a lot of discouragement, a lot of regret. So we just evaluate our life, where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going, and we think, man, life looks kind of sucky for us. The challenge for today that I would propose is, what if you're wrong? What if the problem is not your situation, but it's your vision of it? What if, even though you see your past, your present, and future as being quite bleak and kind of sad, what if God sees that same situation and goes, you are blessed, and you don't even know it? Numbers chapter 22 to 24, this is the longest story in the book of Numbers. It's known as the Balaam story, and it's kind of bizarre. Like if you grew up in the church, you kind of know this story, right? Balaam, it's a pagan sorcerer. There's a donkey that starts talking. We're going to get there. We're going to talk about that talking donkey. And there's these like random oracles that maybe you haven't really been familiar with. Like Balaam gives these 4 different oracles, and you're like, what is that about? And even though it could seem really bizarre, I'd actually propose that this story, the story of Balaam, it is actually the heart of Numbers. It is, in fact, of all the stories in Numbers, this is the story that the author wants you to pay attention to. And it's not just because I'm preaching this. Like this is, I think, literally the way the book of Numbers is structured. Remember the Torah, there's 5 books, Genesis, all the way to Deuteronomy. It's actually structured, I've showed this before, but this is the way the Torah is structured. And there's a lot of intentionality between this. Leviticus is unique, but Genesis, Deuteronomy, they actually reflect each other. And Exodus and Numbers, it's meant to be a reflection. They actually are meant to be mirror books of each other. What do I mean by that? The book of Exodus, God rescues Israel from a foreign king because Israel is multiplying and the king gets freaked out, Pharaoh, and so he enslaves them. And what happens is after he rescues Israel, they go to the wilderness and then they end up at Mount Sinai. Numbers is interesting. They're at Mount Sinai, they travel the wilderness, and God, he now rescues them from a foreign king because he's freaked out that they're getting too big. Interesting. Exodus, the climax is that Red Sea parting where God rescues Israel from slavery. And here Numbers is trying to do the same thing. This is the moment, the dramatic moment. God's going to rescue Israel. Not from slavery per se, but how they see life, how they see their circumstances, and what awaits them as they move forward. See, even though Israel is messed up and feels lost, God is actually working out his promises, and he's fulfilling his covenant in the midst of what they're doing. And in a similar way, what if your life, it doesn't have to stay stuck and broken, but what if God could work out his promises through all the things that are happening in your life now? Just like that TikTok guy who saw treasure in a binder full of junk, what if what God sees is true, where there is more to your life that's happening than just junk and burdens and struggles? So today we're going to talk about 3 things. Looking at this complex story, we're going to talk about 3 headings. Number 1 is the problem of when we can't see. 2, a vision of what God sees. And then 3, a vision of what God plans to do. So the problem when we can't see, a vision of what God sees. Lastly, a vision of what God plans to do. Let's first talk about the problem when we can't see. Numbers 22, let's look at the story again. This story begins when a king named Balak, by the way, some people call it Balak, Balaam is Balaam. We're Western Americans, we'll call it Balak, just for the sake of us being on the same page. Balak, he sees Israel, they are camped at the plains of Moab, and he is terrified. Look at chapter 22 again, verses 1 to 3. It says, and the people of Israel set out and camped in the plains of Moab beside the Jordan at Jericho. And Balak the son of Zippor saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was in great dread of the people because there were many. And Moab was overcome with fear because of the people of Israel. So they're scared. All these people are camped out. They're like, what's this large group going to do to us? And so what they decide to do is, you know what we got to do? We got to do something to weaken them. And they don't do it where they plan an attack. They don't drop like ravens with stones to drop them. They don't shoot arrows. What they do is we need to hire somebody to curse Israel.
Now, back then, if you said that, let's curse them, everyone would be like, yeah, that's right. They'd all totally agree with it. Today, we have no idea. That's such a weird idea, like curse them. Like we think of voodoo dolls. Like, what do you mean you're going to curse them? And the reason why is back then, they had a different worldview than we do today, where back then, they saw that your words can shape reality. There are forces out there that are unnamed, that if you use words, it does something to not destroy people, but to weaken, to navigate, to shape the destiny of other people. That's kind of the idea of curses. And again, we live in a secular society. That still sounds strange, but I'd argue we still do something like that today. Any guys caught up with that big battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni? Oh, if you don't know what I'm talking about, so Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni did a movie together, and pretty much something happened, and it's a dispute of like what happened, and pretty much they're battling in the courts. I have no idea who's Team Justin. I have no idea who's Team Blake. I'm just gonna be neutral at this point right now, but pretty much they're in a lawsuit, and someone's gonna lose whatever happens. But before this lawsuit happened, you found out that, they each hired a PR team to write articles, to send out tweets, to kind of in the algorithm put out these videos to cancel each other. And I realized, that's pretty much, you're using words, you're using different voices to shape the outcome of what this trial is going to be. In other words, it's almost like the curses of the ancient world. The way we do it today is we cancel each other. We're using words to shape reality. It doesn't do anything yet except shape the perception and the opinion of the public masses, and it could shape the outcome of whatever happens in the court case. But it's kind of like the ancient version of canceling is cursing. Curse them, say these negative words out there so that the forces could do a work and they would be prone to lose the battle. Now, Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, they hired a PR firm to cancel each other, professional cancelers. Balak, he hires their version of a PR firm, which is this sorcerer named Balaam. Balaam is an interesting guy. If you look at verse 4-6, look what it says. So Balak, the son of Zippor, who was the king of Moab at the time, sent messengers to Balaam. And then jumping over, come now, curse the people for me. And he says, quote, for I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. Balaam is not just any sorcerer. Balaam is a guy where this guy knows how to cancel people. Like when he sends out tweets, it jacks people. Balaam is the type of person where he is world renowned. In fact, outside the Bible, there's writings of a guy named Balaam who's a prophet. They think it's talking about this Balaam here. He's not just in the Bible, he's in secular history. And Balaam's an interesting prophet. He's known as what's called a Baru prophet, which is he's an animal prophet, meaning the way he prophesies is he'll open an animal, he'll look at the liver, and looking at the liver is like, this is what the gods are saying. His animals are his specialty of how to discern the will of the gods. And so pretty much what Balak wants to do is, hey, come and have Yahweh curse this people. And so look what happens in verse 21. It says, so Balaam rose in the morning, saddled his donkey, and he went with the princes of Moab to go and do the job. And this is where the story gets weird. This is where our VBS memory all comes back, where all of a sudden, as Balaam's traveling, and this isn't in the text, so I'm going to show on the screen, but he's traveling on a donkey. Suddenly, the story says, an angel with the sword comes standing in their way. Look what it says. It says, now Balaam, he was riding on a donkey, and his two servants was with him. And the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with the drawn sword in the hand. The donkey turned aside out the road and went into the field. Balaam struck the donkey to turn her into the road. So the angel comes, the donkey goes, sees it, tries to turn away. Balaam doesn't seize it, just hits the donkey, goes, dude, go back. And this happens 3 times in the story. And the third time, though, it happens where the donkey sees the angel and Balaam doesn't see it. The donkey just falls to the ground, and this is where it gets really weird. He starts talking to Balaam. Look what it says in the next passage, chapter 22, verse 28. It says, then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times? And Balaam said to the donkey, because you have made me a fool, I wish I had a sword in my hand, for then I would kill you. Okay, stories like this make the Bible really hard to believe. I mean, this is like a scene from Shrek more than reality. Like, what is going on here? I don't know, Christians, I don't know what you say when we get to this part. You're just like, I don't know, I guess that's just the way the Bible story is. If I could just address a few things about the talkie-talkie stuff. This is weird to us today, But just know this would be weird for any reader at any time, including Hebrew readers. Because the Bible does not claim that there was once upon a time a land where there's a bunch of talking animals. Talking animals, it only happens twice in the Bible. Genesis chapter 3, where a serpent talks in the garden, and here. That's the only time. Why is the donkey talking in this moment? If you actually are familiar with Torah, you'll know, oh, it makes sense because God is speaking through a donkey for a reason, not because at any moment your dog could talk to you. That's not the point of what the Bible is trying to say. What's happening is Balaam, again, what is he? He's not just a prophet, but he is a Beru prophet. Animals are his thing. He's always working with animals. And God, he's the type of God who uses familiar things to get people's attention. Do you remember how God first spoke to Moses? The burning bush. That's weird too, a plant talking to you. And yet, the reason why God did that in the story of Exodus is because Moses was a shepherd. He sees bushes all the time, and he uses what's familiar to get Moses' attention. Balaam is also something familiar is happening, this animal that he's always working with. God is speaking to him. That's why I notice Balaam, he's not like, oh my gosh, my donkey's talking. He's used to this stuff. It's just the norm in his life, and God is using that according to the story of Numbers to get his attention. And not only that, though, this story, it's not just an unusual story. It's actually meant to mock Balaam. Because here you have Balaam, this renowned prophet who sees God, sees spiritualities, could claim, like, oh, I could curse whoever you curse. Don't worry, I got this. That's Balaam. And yet, there's an angel standing right in front of him about to kill him, and he can't see it. But his stupid donkey can. It's almost like God is saying, like, oh, there's nothing special about you, Balaam. In fact, I could speak through a stupid donkey, and I'm going to speak through even a dumber donkey, you, Balaam, later on in Numbers 23 and 24. It's meant to mock that this is not somebody that's special, who Balaam is. It's making a point that you can be spiritually gifted, you can have reputation, you could even know Yahweh. Balaam says, Yahweh's my God, I know Yahweh, and he's kind of a confusing character in that way, and yet he's blind. He doesn't see spiritual reality. He doesn't see an angel right in front of him until God is the one that gives him sight in chapters 23 to 24. How does this relate to us today? Well, a lot of us, we might have the same problem. We think we see, but we're actually blind. When you're actually blind, like, think of physical blindness, what that means. Here's a simple definition. To be physically blind is to have the impaired ability to recognize what's around you physically. Imagine you're blindfolded in the forest. You could hear the birds chirping. You could smell and the flowers and the roses. You can touch the dirt. But one thing you will not be able to do is you can't see the beauty of a waterfall. You cannot see the danger of a cliff that's in front of you because you're blind. You don't have that faculty at your disposal. If there's more to this world than just the physical, that means you can't just only be physically blind, but there's a possibility of what the Bible calls spiritual blindness, the impaired ability to recognize what's around you spiritually. When you are spiritually blind, that doesn't mean you can't believe God exists. You might believe in God. You might be a good person where you live a moral life, you avoid doing bad things, but you will never understand the beauty of God. When you're spiritually blind, you don't understand why is he beautiful. When you're spiritually blind, you won't understand the brokenness of sin, not just avoiding bad things, but the deformity of what it does to a human soul, because you're spiritually blind. And here's the main problem for us. A lot of us here, whether we know or not, there's actually a spiritual blindness, and only God can enable you to see. That's one of the main metaphors in the Bible of conversion. It's not just being born again. It's not just believing and having faith, but it talks a lot about the idea of your eyes being opened. One example, Acts chapter 26, this is what the Lord says to the Apostle Paul. I am sending you, Paul, to them to open their eyes and turn from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins. This is why a lot of Christians, when you talk to them, a lot of them will say they became a Christian. When they became a Christian, they didn't all of a sudden start trying harder and start going, I'm going to take holiness seriously. What a lot of Christians will say is, I just see everything differently now. All the things that the pastors and the Bible and teachers taught me, I was always aware of it, but now for the first time, I see it. It just makes sense now. There's a sister I remember a while ago talking to her, and we were chatting, and it was so fascinating because she was telling me, I was like, how long have you been going to church for? And she's like, oh, a few months. Like, how long did you grow up in the church? Like, I grew up in church all my life. I'm like, okay, like, how long have you been a Christian for? She's like, just 2 years. I'm like, really, 2 years? Like, tell me your history. And it was fascinating how her testimony was the exact same testimony as every member at our church. She was born in the church. She went to VBS. She served in youth group. She became a small group leader. She became a praise leader. She went on mission trips. She did an altar call. She gave her life to Jesus. She learned the gospel. She understood the creeds. She started living out her faith. She did Bible studies. And I remember I was just like, wait, you weren't a Christian that time? And she was like, I don't think so. I'm like, why? And she's like, because a few years ago, my mom got cancer. And that rocked my world. And I was like, how did that rock your world? Like, what was the main thing you learned from that? And she's like, the main thing I learned when my mom got cancer was I wasn't really a Christian. I was doing a lot of Christian things. I thought I was a Christian. But when that diagnosis happened, everything became real, and I started to see things just radically differently. The grace of God, the corruption of sin, the hope of heaven, it all just became like real to me. Now, it's such a fascinating story because I feel like that's so many of us, where we think we're Christians, we think we're good, but it's because you know about God, you hear about God, you don't see him. You don't see the beauty. If you saw the beauty of God, you would not be living your life the way you're living right now. If you saw the deformity of sin, you would not be as casual about it. And yet for a lot of us, we're like Balaam. We think we know Yahweh, but we are so blind. We're spiritually blind. How do you know if you're blind like Balaam? What's a sign? Here, there's many signs, but let me just give one sure sign that you're spiritually blind. One mark that you are spiritually blind is you don't know you're blind. The mark of a spiritual blindness is you think you're fine. I'm fine. Are you a good person? Yeah, I'm a pretty good person. Do you need Jesus? Yeah, when I'm not busy. Do you need the community of saints? Yeah, I'm generally okay. You're so blind. You're so blind, and what's worse is you're blind to your blindness. There's no humility. There's no awareness. There's no fear of the Lord. It's just you're okay. You're casual about things, and God has to open your eyes. Church, I know we get frustrated people who just don't seem to get things. It's because God has to open our eyes. And all we can do is pray. How do you know you can spiritually see? What's a mark of being able to have spiritual sight? When you know that you're blind. Oh, when someone says, dude, I have no idea what I'm doing. Oh my gosh, marriage is so crazy. I have no idea how to work, what to do. I have no idea how to approach life. Ooh, you're beginning to see, brother. You're beginning to see. The mark of spiritual sight is you recognize how blind you've been in your past, how blind you probably are right now, and how you need sight moving forward. That takes a humble heart. Are you blind? Or can you see? Because if you see, then it leads to the second point. This is the vision of God. What does God see when he gives sight to his people? So Numbers 23-24, again, the donkey story is just the intro. There's a lot more that happens. Balaam arrives at the plain of Moab. He meets Balak, and then Balak, he brings Balaam to this hill, and pretty much this hill, he's overseeing the camps of Israel. I saw this picture online. I thought it was pretty cool. This is what it looks like. Imagine, Balaam's over there. He just looks at all these Israelites camped out. And Balak's pretty much like, hey, so go talk to Yahweh and tell Yahweh, curse these people. Pretty much speak words of condemnation and misfortune to them. It's like if someone, like Justin Baldoni or Blake Lively tells the PR firm, send down the takedown tweet. Send out the tweets. Let the New York Times article go out. And Balaam's like, I got you. And he goes up the mountain, sacrifices animals, talks to Yahweh, and he comes back, and Balak's waiting for him, so what happened? And we find 3 oracles take place. And each oracle is very fascinating. So here's the first oracle. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but a couple of highlights in this oracle. Balaam comes back to Balak, and he goes, I talked to Yahweh, and dude, I have a message for you. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? And verse 10, who can count the dust of Jacob or number the fourth part of Israel? Let me die the death of the upright. Let my end be like his. Pretty much what Balaam is doing, if you were to imagine this as a tweet, Balaam is tweeting out, Israel camp is popping. They are huge. In fact, I want to join them. It's like, why would you tweet that out? Like, I'm trying to destroy their reputation. Like, what are you doing? And so Balak is like really upset. Like, that can't be the only thing that words you say. Go back up there, different part of the mountain, and try to make sure you curse them a different way. So Balak does it, and then we get the second oracle where he comes back. And the second oracle, he comes back and tells Balak, he goes, the Lord their God is with them. Behold a people, as a lioness it rises up, as a lion it lifts itself up. Again, this is like pretty much what he's saying if you put it in tweet form. Dude, nobody should mess with these guys. God is with them. They're like a lion. I have no idea why he sounds Gen Z, but Balaam's just like, don't mess with them. And Balak's just like, what in the world? Like, why are you tweeting that out? Like, that is not helping the cause. So he goes a third time, go and talk to Yahweh again. Same thing happens. This third oracle is given, and this is the most interesting one. Balaam says, how lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your encampments, O Israel, like palm groves that stretch afar, like gardens besides a river, like aloes that the Lord has planted, like cedar trees besides the waters. Balaam's first looking at the camp, and he's like, man, I just saw it, and this is what I saw. And he tweets out, I just saw Israel's campsite. It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. What is happening here? What are these oracles about? Balak, he wants Balaam to cancel Israel. He wants Balaam to just like send out the tweets, send out the articles to just destroy them so all the spiritual forces know that this is a nation that's going to fall. But every time Balaam went to curse Israel, he came back and it became a blessing. It became a blessing from God. Why is that? Have you ever heard of celebrities where, it seems like any celebrity could get canceled, and like they're just vulnerable. Like if you say the wrong thing, you're gonna get canceled. But there's one celebrity like you cannot cancel, Keanu Reeves. Like Keanu Reeves, they've tried to cancel him. Like if you ever do, like there's like a period where like people were like putting up stories like Keanu Reeves, like why he's overrated, his acting is wooden, he's kind of awkward in his interviews, why does he talk all slow? And people were like bashing him, and dude, like the internet like got his back, that you are not canceling him. And they just like showed all these stories of like how Keanu was nice to them, how he was so kind. He had pictures of all these girls. He never touched the girls. He's just respectful of women. I remember one person said, you know what we should do is, I feel like anyone who was hurt by Keanu, we should say sorry to Keanu, because it was probably our fault. Like Keanu is just untouchable. You cannot cancel that person. And that's kind of what's almost going on here. The only thing that's different is Keanu, he's just a sweet guy. Like you just can't cancel him because he's almost like worthy to not be canceled. Israel, like they deserve to be canceled. They did a lot of messed up stuff. And so I almost feel like what's happening here is almost, maybe if Keanu isn't the best example, it's like if someone was trying to cancel my son. My son Judah, like he does a lot of bad things. Like he's not the perfect kid. I could tell you like list of like the things he does that damages the world and like damages society and damages me. And let's pretend there's a moment where people, like he did something bad. And if interviewers came up to me going, hey man, like you're his father and your son's like, what do you want to say? Like, because we got it from your father, paint the story of who he is. And I could easily be like, I saw this coming. Like he was always troubled. And I just contribute to the cancellation of my son. But I would never do that to my son. I would be like, I'm not going to cancel my son. I'm not going to contribute to this. And in fact, if you told me to send out a statement about my son who's in the midst of a firestorm, I tweet out, I love my son. My son's the best. I tweet out pictures of him as a child to show, like, this is my son, just to fight the forces of evil that's battling against him in the Twitter world. I would show pictures of him and videos of him making baskets. I show videos, I describe what a good person he is, even though I know there's a lot of messed up stuff about him. He's my son. And I never, ever, I'm going to have him feel cursed in front of me. I want blessing for him. And this is kind of what's happening with Israel. No matter what Israel has done, and they messed up so often. And this is the perfect chance. Yahweh, like, they're messed up. Dude, say something. Yahweh loves Israel still. He is committed to their flourishing, and he's showing pictures to Balaam of what he sees when he sees Israel. Oh, you see Israel and you want to curse them? Look how big they are. This first oracle, it's all about my plans are being fulfilled. They are being fruitful and multiplying up to where you cannot count them. This is the Abrahamic promise. I'm not going to curse them. In fact, blessing is happening. Do you not see that, Balaam? The second oracle, it's all about presence. They messed up, for sure. I am with them. They're like a lion. Don't mess with them, Yahweh's saying. And the third oracle, you see tents, you see people cooking, you see dirty Israelites. I see beauty. It's the Garden of Eden. This is what I'm forming. I am forming a people, a holy nation, and a royal priesthood. God is faithful to his covenant promises to the point where when curses are literally trying to fall upon the nation of Israel, Yahweh reverses it and makes it into a blessing. This is significant for us because we all live in a broken world. And again, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of us are experiencing a context of where it feels like curses. There's a lot of curses in our lives. I know personally when I reflect on my story, man, I experienced a lot of curses, what feels like curses at least. Like many of you, I come from an immigrant family. And I remember, today, at least the gauge I have, like being Korean as a kid right now is cool. Like BTS, Squid Games, it's like there's some clout that's there. That was not like that in the 90s. Like in the 90s, it was not cool to be Korean at all. And I felt the brunt of that. I so wished my parents, they just could have a normal conversation with my teachers without me having to translate for them. And there was so much shame that I had to explain why my parents couldn't speak English well, why our house smelled funny because of the Asian food. And there were times where I was like, why do I come from an immigrant family? This kind of sucks. I experienced what people call being othered. By being othered, meaning I was too Asian for my white friends, but I was too white for my Asian friends. So I was in this weird, homeless land. I didn't know where I fit at all. I also, even in the Christian world, I grew up Roman Catholic. So all the Christians what's that? I have no idea what Awana is. I have no idea, Chris Tomlin. And Stephen Curtis Chapman, he's a mystery to me. I heard of his name, but I don't know who all these artists and Christian things that people grew up in, I had no idea. So I was Christian, yet kind of not legit. That was the feeling I had. I experienced a lot of church hurt. I know a lot of you could relate with me here, where there's a lot of brokenness that I experienced in my Catholic community, a lot of brokenness in my Protestant community, a lot of pastors and leaders who have hurt me, a lot of members who have hurt me. And I know for me, I naturally look at these moments in my life, and a certain perspective is I experienced a lot of shame, a lot of pain, and a lot of rejection and hurt. It feels like curses. It generally feels like curses. I'm sure some of you could relate. You experienced divorce in your life. You've experienced domestic violence in your life. You've experienced being othered yourself. And it still kind of gets to you to this moment. And that's where the story of the Bible, one of the main messages that describes who God is he's a God who reverses curses. When you belong to him, the curses that fall upon his people, he turns it to blessing. We see it in the Balaam story. This group looks cursed, and Balaam wants to bring more curses. And Yahweh's but they are my people. My covenant covers them. Blessing only for them. And it's not just in the Balaam story, but we see it in the heart of the gospel. Galatians chapter 3, the Apostle Paul writes, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. The gospel says at the cross, Jesus took every curse, sin, shame, hell itself, that separates us from God, and he absorbs it in himself. But it's not just that. He doesn't just absorb the curse, but what theologians call the great exchange, he gives blessing. Jesus offers grace, forgiveness, a new life, because he died the death that we deserved. And so this great reversal process, it's not just at the cross where we're being saved, but that's justification. We also believe in sanctification. It's not just at salvation, but even your formation. And now as you live, don't just be with Christ, but be like him. And all the curses that seem like it's there, it is actually part of this forming and deepening of your soul. Again, I look back at my immigration life and I think, how is this a blessing? How did God even use this as something helpful? And it wasn't until I actually talked to a pastor recently where it was so random. We're talking about churches in New York, and he's from New York, and we're like, how are churches in New York? Because New York is a tough place to start a church. He's like, to be honest, all the mega churches that try it, they all die. Like Saddleback, they wouldn't survive in New York. Like those, Victory, it doesn't happen. There's one type of church that makes it in New York. Surprisingly, immigrant churches. All the first generation Chinese, Korean, Japanese churches, they do really well in New York, he was saying. They're not big, but there's almost this resilience that immigration gets you, that it builds in you, that makes you ready for kingdom work. Whenever I heard that, I was just I never thought of that. I never thought of my immigration background making me not just scarred, but it builds grit in you, and it prepares you for what lies ahead. Fascinating. I remember the idea of feeling othered. It felt man, it sucks just having your own zone. But to be honest, whenever I hear passages on heaven, it just fills my soul because I don't belong here, man. I don't belong with the Asians. I don't belong with the non-Asians. Maybe there's another place that I belong to. It opens up an interesting doorway for me. When I look at the curse of church hurt, I so wish I had a church where I could just give testimony of blessing. And some of you, if you have that, awesome. That's nothing wrong with that. But now, because of the church hurt that I experienced, there's a I'm not sure if you guys heard, there's on a TikTok right now, this pastor getting canceled in a certain community, and everyone's just sharing their church, how they're traumatized by their church and so forth. And when I read those stories, I'm I get it. There is nothing but empathy because I understand how churches can mess you up. And I'm wow, I would never have had that type of empathy if I had never experienced that type of hurt that's there. In other words, there's a version of my life that I look at where I look at everything as curses, and that's almost looking at things like Balaam, just blind to the spiritual realities. Versus another way of looking at life where it's oh, if God is real and he protects and blesses his people, everything, including the curses, are leading to something that's called blessing. What about you? How do you view your life? What do you look like when you look at your own life? The Apostle Paul, he tells Christians, he prays, have the eyes of your hearts enlightened that you may know what is the hope to which he has called you. Paul prays, would your eyes see what God is doing, the love of God, the hope of God in your life. And that's what we need too. When you look at your life, do you see the problems of your life as pain, or do you see it as purposeful? Do you see it as failure, or do you see it as formation? Do you see curses covering your life, or do you see actually blessings are breaking through? This is the difference between sight, or blindness rather, versus sight. Balaam versus the vision of God. How do you view your life? Do you see it the way Balaam does, or the way God sees? And that leads to the last point, which is the idea of not just what God sees, but a vision of what God is going to do. Number 24, it ends on an interesting note where Balaam, he gives these 3 oracles, and Balak's now irritated. Dude, you totally messed up. You said all the wrong tweets. And he fires him. He goes, you're fired. You're done. And Balaam, he's okay, but before I go, one more thing to tell you. It's totally unprompted. It's really interesting. Look at what it says in chapter 24, verse 14. Balaam says, come, I'll let you know what this people will do to your people in the latter days. Very interesting. The first 3 oracles, it's I see what God sees right now. But this last oracle, Balaam goes, okay, before I go, there's actually one more thing. God showed me something, and I need it, and God wants me to tell you what that is. And here's the 4th and last oracle. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. This is the one oracle where he sees a vision of the future, where it's oh, all roads, no matter what happens, it leads to this scepter, this figure that's going to be coming. And if you're a Torah reader, you would know, oh, this sounds like Genesis 3. The seed of the woman is going to crush the serpent. Genesis 49, the royal scepter shall not leave the tribe of Judah, or shall come from the tribe of Judah. And here, all of a sudden, oh, you have a star and a scepter language going on. This is messianic language. I see a Messiah coming out of Israel, and is going to one day crush all of Israel's enemies. And the reason why Balaam gives this oracle is because Israel's journey, it hasn't nearly finished. It's about to just begin. After Numbers, there's the book of Deuteronomy. There's going to be the book of Joshua, Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings. There's going to be temple, exile. There's going to be second temple. There's going to be the Romans who take over. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs that Israel goes through. And what Balaam's showing through this prophecy, and all roads, it's going to end up leading to the Messiah. Someone who's going to be born among you and is going to vanquish all evil. Balaam saw a star, but what's interesting for us is centuries later, there's another prophet, you could call him. He doesn't see a star, but he tells us, I don't see a star, but I see a city coming. Revelation 21 says, the Apostle John, I saw a holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for a husband. God himself will be with them as their God, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning. In other words, John says all roads that we experience today, the ups and downs, it all leads to a city where that same star, that Messiah, Jesus Christ himself, he's going to come and he's going to reign and he's going to rule and he's going to make all things right. And so for us, as we navigate through this life right now, perhaps for us, and this is the temptation when you go through hardships, like why is this happening? Why is this happening? Our main question is why? Like why is this happening? Why? Maybe a better question to ask is not why, but what? We don't know why this is happening, but the Bible tells us what's going to happen. And so as you navigate through your life this week and you experience the curses, 2 questions to consider to ask yourself. 2 what questions? 1, not why, but what is God going to do in the end? Why drives you crazy, but God tells us at the end, we did see a picture of a story. There's a city that's coming, where one day God's going to put out all the fires of racism, misogyny, injustice, betrayal, abuse, death, loss, and everything in between. So no matter how bad your life might be, it's temporary. It's a season. It doesn't make it easy, but it does make it a little bit easier knowing like, okay, there is a plan in mind. It's not just chaos. Something's going to happen in the end. And the second what question to ask is, and what is God doing in me right now? Some of you are in a difficult season right now, and maybe it's not just know that there's an ending, but knowing something's happening where God's trying to mature you and open you up right now in what feels like a curse so that you could experience a type of blessing that only this path could actually bring you. What if that was happening to you at this moment? To conclude, if I could just say one last thing about this story and we'll be done. You know what the craziest part of the story is? Just to kind of leave you with this. As all this is happening, where Balaam is like cursing, talking to Balak, and Yahweh's doing all the tweets and stuff are happening. As all that's happening, you know what Israel's doing? They're just cooking their food. They're just washing their clothes. They don't even know what's happening. Because all this drama that we just read, it's happening on this giant hill, overseeing the camp, while Israel's just doing their own thing. Israel didn't go, save us, Yahweh. They don't even know Yahweh is doing anything. And what's significant about that is that means that we have a God who's doing 1,000 different things behind the scenes that we have zero clue what's happening. But it's all to bless his people, to protect his people. And that's why the why question is not very helpful, because you don't know what God is up to. But he is moving. And that's where I find the Balaam story. It is bizarre, but it's also beautiful, because it shows that God, he is fighting battles that we don't even know are being engaged right now. But do you have eyes to see? Do you have eyes to see that this is our God? That he is working in your life, both in the visible and in the invisible. Let's all pray together before we close.